Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Hello, and welcome to Haman Nature. Thank you for joining us. With me, as always, my buddy Tyrone, the porcupine hobo. How you doing, Tyrone?
Hey, pretty good, Adam. How you doing today?
I'm good, but I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little judgy. I'm
Well,
feeling, in
still
fact, just the right amount of judgy.
okay. Well, I still have my robe and gown from my graduation of high school, so maybe I should dig that out of the closet for this episode. Although I doubt it would fit me. I was a lot skinnier back then.
Was your gown like ours, where they did it in the school colors?
No, it was just black. As
It
I
was just black. No,
remember.
mine was
Yeah.
like, what was my colors? Like purplish or magenta and gold.
Okay.
Very strange. So it wouldn't be Supreme Court justicey. And
Gotcha.
also, I'm not the kind of dweeb who would hold on to his graduation gown. Good Lord, who would do that?
I'll guarantee my mom has it somewhere saved in a trunk somewhere. I have no idea. But
My boy, look what he did.
All right, man. So, well, I guess that means we're talking about some legal things that have happened. What do we got going on in this episode?
Well, yeah. The Supreme Court of these here United States has been finally released a bunch of opinions, and we were interested in many of them. So, do you have an opinion on which one you want to start talking about first?
Wow. Well, they came down with a bunch of big ones, all like in the same couple of weeks, like just like one after the other. It was crazy. And like one, if any of these had come out by themselves, like the only real decision that came out for the year, they'd all be big headline rulings. But they released a bunch of them. Obviously, let's start with the big one, the one that everybody's talking about, and that's the immunity one.
Sure. Well, I think it's sort of normal for them to release opinions in a batch, and I think this one was a little bigger than normal, maybe because
Yeah.
I think they were waiting until after that semi-historic debate, because it was just going to be such a big deal. And since one of them was Trump's immunity thing,
Right.
yeah,
It just seems like all of them were so monumental, and they're all going to have
they
just such
were.
huge impacts. These were not little little rulings. So why don't you do an overview of? I know in your newsletter you covered a couple of these. So remember, folks, you can subscribe. Go to HamanNature.com and sign up for the free newsletter that Adams writes up, and you get great info and his take on sort of the news, and then occasionally we'll talk about these things on our podcast here. So why don't you give us an overview of that immunity one?
Sure. Well, yeah, we'll start with that one, which is one I haven't written about yet. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But yeah, it covers an issue about, can presidents be sued? And the details. Well, maybe you should lead this off, because I'm not even sure which case specifically was it that advanced all the way up there to the court. Do you know who was it Trump v somebody, or?
Let's pause. We should know
pause.
this.
No, let's not pause. Gosh darn it, it doesn't matter. We know what it did. Trump's legal team advanced the theory that he is immune from prosecution, and I can't remember which one it was, but it would make sense that it was a Georgia case where he's on the phone saying to the guy, "Find me those votes," and everyone interprets it like Trump is a mob boss, and he's saying, "Hey, wink, wink, find me those votes." And yeah, so Trump's legal team says you can't prosecute him for that because he's got presidential immunity, and that advanced quickly to the Supreme Court, who overturned previous courts who said, no, you have no such immunity. And the court said, very surprisingly, that, yeah, you do. And then in the majority opinion, which went 6-3 along conservative/liberal lines, they said specifically that presidents have immunity from acts that they have done in their official capacity, and not necessarily for acts that were not in their official capacity, which raises the question, what exactly counts as official capacity? So there'll be a lot of future lawsuits, I assume, that'll probe those those definitional bounds. So what do you think? What do you think about the decision? Are you in favor or are you not?
Ah, boy. This is one of those where I'm torn. I don't like the idea of giving immunity to presidents for official acts. Because actually, so everybody on the left is super upset about this, right? And of course they're being completely short-sighted, as they always are, because this is going to benefit both parties in both directions. So something like this now, even though it was never, ever, ever going to happen, it now makes prosecuting former presidents for war crimes impossible. They're now immune for dropping drone strikes and bombs on American citizens in Afghanistan, or whatever atrocities, torture programs. They're now all immune. So congratulations. But it's not like they were ever going to be prosecuted for those things anyway, right?
That's for sure.
So because they were never ever going to be prosecuted for those things anyway, then you have to sort of take the silver lining when you can get it. So then the flip side is that uh, maybe this will curb. Gosh, I'm too black pilled to even believe the words I'm
You can't
about
find the
to
silver lining.
to even say the words that are about to come out of my mouth. But if there was a silver lining, it would be something like this might curb the lawfare, that's been going on. So now, the left is attacking Trump and the right through the legal system. Well, when the power dynamics flip, you can imagine that the Republicans would then go after the Democrats, lawsuits and things like that, and perhaps this will curb some of that. And
No, that's a legit silver lining. I can think of two other ones.
okay,
One is that perhaps in the legal jousting, about trying to prosecute presidents or not prosecuting presidents, maybe there will be more focus paid on what the duties and official duties of a president are, because I believe they've expanded over the years, and that's probably not a good thing. So it doesn't bother me that issue gets looked at a little bit more closely, regardless of why people are looking at it. And then I have another big silver lining, because like you, I don't like the idea of presidents being immune. As our type of people famously say, all presidents that we can remember, are guilty of war crimes and should be prosecuted as such, but that'll never happen. But I do find a big silver lining in this decision, and I kind of want to put a pin in that because it has to do with my analysis of another one of the cases that we're going to talk about, the one about Chevron deference.
Okay. So what I guess staying on this one with the immunity, then what do you think the impact will be? Do you think there'll be any immediate impacts? Do you think it will affect
I don't think
the
there'll be any
election?
immediate impacts except for it'll drop these cases. They were already in stasis, most of them, and I think the judge who was going to sentence Trump this month, I think he said he's not going to do that. He's going to review this result and decide how it impacts this case. And I think it's going to end up just pushing everything back to the election. And I wouldn't be surprised if the four cases in question just got dropped. I think the other three were while he was in office, and technically this one was too.
Are you talking about the Stormy Daniels one?
Yeah, I mean it wasn't an official act, so maybe that one would survive.
Yeah, I don't know how that one would apply, except that
Well,
because
I'm not saying it would apply. I'm saying that they might just shrug and admit that they were just being lawfare goofballs and just let it, pretend it didn't happen. But I'm just speculating. I really have no idea. I mean, what do
okay.
you think? How do you think it's going to impact what happens this year with the election?
So I think the Stormy Daniels one, I think the judge in that is what what do they call it?
Corrupt. The word is corrupt.
No, a judicial activist, I think is what I was trying to go for. So Trump's already been convicted. I don't see how this Supreme Court ruling affects this because there's no official act involved. In my opinion, this was a private matter, that to affect an election. So in fact, I'd say it's the opposite of an official act. And I think, yeah, the judge is going to delay it, but I think he's still going to sentence Trump to like time in prison.
What do you think about the argument that I hear whispering around the right-leaning corners of the internet, that even though the jury voted to convict, he's not officially convicted until the judge files the paperwork and issues a sentence and all that, and maybe he won't or something.
Oh, I guess I don't know how that works.
Yeah, it's a technicality, as
It's
I
a
understand it.
technicality,
Yeah,
and
but
it
like the
doesn't
jury
really.
could vote to convict, and the judge could discard it. That
That's
happens.
true. I think a judge can set aside a verdict, right?
Yeah, I mean, this judge doesn't have any ideological desire to do that, obviously,
No.
but it is interesting that all this turmoil has come up and that it's a thing that could happen. Maybe he won't end up being convicted. Who knows?
Yeah, I think maybe you're right for a couple of reasons that they might just set it aside and say let it go because one, the purpose of this was never to really put Trump behind bars. The trial is in the court of public opinion.
Right.
They can now go around CNBC, MSNBC, all the new Fox News, all the corporate shills and say Trump is convicted. Right? And that's all they need. That's the only message they need to send out into the world. That if you vote for Trump, you're voting for a convicted felon. Okay? So for the most of the masses that don't follow things too closely, that's the headline they hear. Second, if they were to put him behind bars or an ankle bracelet or something like that, they've already seen what had happened to his fundraising abilities when the verdict came down. He raised like an insane amount, astronomical, record-breaking amount of money. He got donations immediately after that happened. If they actually lock him up, the Trump supporters are just going to go ballistic. Not only will he raise so much more money, I mean, something else might happen. And the left doesn't want that. They just want to play this game of we're besmirching your reputation. For them, it's all just about image. That's all they've ever been concerned about. It's just how things look. They don't care about actual results. They don't care if Trump's actually the president. They've got
Well,
him
I
in his
think
back pocket anyway. So
I'll push back on that a little bit. I think what they care about first and foremost is making sure that he does not win this election. And in service of that goal, they're willing to do anything. And, they just don't care what it is. So the fact that these lawsuits are ridiculous, that doesn't really matter. What really matters is Orange Hitler can't be allowed to take the reins of power because they've worked themselves up into a tizzy thinking that they will all literally be rounded up and shot and we will have an empire from here on out if he wins again for some stupid reason.
I've never bought that. I understand that's the narrative, but that's the narrative that's on CNN or MSNBC.
It's on MSNBC.
That's never the real story, though. The powers that be don't care if Trump. What did Trump do in the 4 years that he was president that the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex would be against? Well,
Just,
well,
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. Provide the slightest bit of friction against their goals. And
where?
just the slightest, they wanted to increase the war in Syria, and he wouldn't. They wanted him to do a lot more than just kill Soleiman, um, and he didn't. He still has instincts that go against the regime's interest. They're inchoate and not well reasoned, but they do run against. And after what they've done to him for the last 8 years or 9 years, whatever it is, they're probably really scared that he'll use the power of the presidency to do something about it in a way that he was incapable of doing the first go around.
Maybe.
You're not worried if you're the deep state when he appoints John Bolton as whatever he
Yeah.
appointed him, national security advisor or
Right.
something. But they probably are worried that he's been listening to. I mean, he went and spoke to the Libertarian Convention, right?
That's
Maybe he's
true.
starting to listen to people who could actually do something about undermining the deep state.
Vivek's in his ear,
Yeah,
and
it's a good sign.
he's
So,
definitely more anti-establishment or whatever.
so I was surprised by this ruling, and I'm guessing that the reason they, excuse me, that they did it was to try and make this sort of lawfare not happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe the tax thing, but I don't think they want all the other kinds of things that
Mm-hmm.
the cases. And again, I'm setting aside a big, huge silver lining, but before I tell you what that is, I want to talk to you about the case that makes me think of it, which is the Chevron deference case.
Okay. So
Um,
this one, in my opinion, was the biggest,
oh, I agree. Yeah.
but not the best.
So let's give the quick rundown.
Yep.
I wrote about it more completely again at hamannature.substack.com. I wrote an article about a couple of these decisions. The Chevron case was in 1984, and it created this legal precedence by which the Supreme Court is to just take the regulatory agency's definition of things in any case where Congress is ambiguous in any way. And by nature of what Congress does and how these agencies are formed, it's almost always ambiguous. Congress will make some highfalutin statement and then create an agency to go do that, and the specifics are determined by the agency. And until 1984, I guess judges would weigh in. This is okay, this isn't okay. But in that decision, they made a precedence that says we're just going to defer. That's the deference part. We're going to defer to the opinion of the regulatory agency in question about what they're supposed to do, which means in practice they can do anything. And interestingly, in the 1984 Chevron case, it was Reagan's EPA that wanted to allow more pollution, to grossly simplify things. And so Chevron joined the case because they were annoyed by that. We've already spent all this money complying with all these regulations. What the hell? You're going to let new upstarts come in and not have to pay? So anyway, that was interesting. And then what just got overturned was a case where fishing boat captains had to pay $700 a day for some spy of the regulatory agency to come on their boat while they're out every day and just make sure they didn't overfish or comply with all the regulations. And they thought it was onerous and appealed or sued, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they overturned specifically that Chevron deference ruling, which is great. If you believe, as you and I do, Tyrone, that they're supposed to be co-equal branches of government, judicial, legislative, and executive. But with these regulatory agencies, as bloated as they are and controlling as much of human life as they do, that makes the executive branch grossly overpowered in relation to the other two. And in this specific instance, it makes legislators just craft laws that are incredibly broad, so that the agencies can interpret them, and it makes the judicial system neutered. They can't do anything about it. And this overturns all of that, which I think is grand.
So the disappointing part about the ruling is that it didn't it only ruled that it was unconstitutional for the these bureaucracies, these agencies to unilaterally make their own rules. Um, but
Well,
what was
they can
go
still
ahead.
make their own rules. It's just that when brought before a court, it's not predetermined that the justices have to just
To
take
defer.
their word for it. Yeah, they still
Right.
can defer, and most of the time they probably will,
Right.
but they don't have to anymore as a basis or as a rule of law.
Right. So while it's a step in the right direction, what really should have been, well, again, pipe dream world. Um, what would have been nice is if the court ruled unconstitutional all these bureaucracies.
Yeah,
Bec-
that's not going to happen.
because because that's the real issue. So look, I don't have a lot of love for the Constitution. I don't think it's a very good document. I mean, it's okay. It's got some good parts to it. We could always throw out the Lysander Spooner thing, blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. But there's bad parts to the Constitution, right?
Sure,
I
yeah.
mean, it had some nice ideas to it, but it also granted way too much power to the federal government. I definitely would be on the side of the anti-federalists if we went way back, to 1789 or whatever.
Sure.
Um, but the United States Constitution was unique in this regard. And this is the way I understand it. This is my approach to the Constitution, that unless it's specifically written in the Constitution, it it can't be done. So why is there a post office? Okay, I'm not for a post office. I wish the post office was privatized, but it's in the Constitution. So constitutionally speaking, post office is legit, right? But where in the Constitution is the FDA, the EPA, the FBI, the CIA, name the 8,000 bureaucracies that exist? It's not written in the Constitution. So, in my opinion, if it's not specific, the way the Constitution is supposed to work, it has to be literally written word for word in the Constitution in order for the federal government to do it. So, what I would have liked to see is the Supreme Court say, all these bureaucracies are unconstitutional. Congress, if you want to have an EPA, if you want to have an FCC, if you want to have an SEC, if you want to have a CFTC, if you want to have blah, 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 you need to amend the Constitution and put Article 1, Section 8 point whatever. The legislative branch may have a FDA, but
Right.
they didn't do that. So, I mean,
Which
I
would
don't know.
take a convention of the states, I think, anyway, right? Anyway, you might one day see that. You might actually see a Supreme Court someday say, yeah, the general welfare clause and the commerce clause, you've all been misinterpreting that grossly for lo these many centuries, and we're just going to strike it all down. That would be lovely, but I don't think it will ever happen
Right.
until we get some sort of a revolution, or unless we do. The way we get some relief will be incremental. And this
Right.
particular rollback is a pretty major,
It's
incremental
huge. It's
move in
huge.
the right direction. And what's interesting about it, and this will lead back to the Trump immunity case, presidential immunity case. Look at what happened here. These regulatory agencies have been running roughshod over us for a long time, since they were created, again. And maybe the court would push back, maybe they wouldn't, or a specific court would push back, maybe they wouldn't. But with the 1984 Chevron decision, they codified what was de facto. They made it de jure. And then we've had that as a policy for 40 years. But what that means is that once codified, it could be uncodified, as just happened. And that's kind of good, right? Rather than it just being the sort of habit of the court that the regulatory agency gets to make up what the law is on the ground. Now we have a, a ruling that says that they can't do that. They specifically can't do that, or at least judges don't have to defer to that. And the reason I think that applies to the presidential immunity case is, as you well know, presidents can drone bomb American citizens and nothing happens. They can break the law in a zillion different ways. And it's just always been the case that they're immune from prosecution as a matter of norms. Well, maybe now the Supreme Court coming down and weighing in and saying they can't, or they can't as for official acts and can for unofficial. Well, now that that's written down and codified, maybe it can be, 20 years go by and it can be uncodified, just like Chevron was uncodified. And then what happens? Well, then you've got specific, you've got it written down in law that presidents can be prosecuted for what they do. So it's just, I was struck by the similarity, that sometimes if a thing can be codified, it can be uncodified. And it's kind of an interesting concept to have presidential immunity subjected to that standard, where it can be written down as a law and then unwritten, and then maybe it'll have some teeth,
So you made that interesting point in your newsletter. Something can be codified, it can be uncodified. However, of course, the obvious thing to follow that would be, well, then it can be recodified.
Oh, sure. I mean, it is.
Right.
I mean, that's what they did. And they can make it worse. They can make it for unofficial
Right.
acts too. I mean, he can walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot a guy in the head and nobody can do anything. But I doubt anything like that will happen. But if we have a legal structure, it's probably better to actually be written down rather than just a rule of thumb that you never touch a president no matter what. It's probably better to have those sorts of things fleshed out.
Yes.
So I was kind of happy about that.
No, it's great. I really hope that we all know that the presidency is BS. Congress is BS. Supreme Court maybe is semi BS. The real power is all those bureaucracy agencies, all those 3-letter groups, and that's where the power is.
I totally agree. And getting back to what this case actually is going to do, it obviously doesn't reverse any of the prior decisions, but going forward, it'll have the effect of sort of forcing Congress to write laws that don't just suck. Think about what you're actually enacting into law. People can vote on it, as we were all taught in Schoolhouse Rock is supposed to happen. And then, so it'll make them write better laws that are more explicit. And it'll also mean that regulatory agencies won't just be so cocksure that they can get away with anything they decide to do. And it'll mean every little court along the way, when a case is brought, doesn't just automatically have to defer. So it definitely shrinks the power of the regulatory state in very, very meaningful ways.
That statement you just made about they'll have to write the laws more clearly, more specifically. I've had this idea for a while. Let me just run this by you. So if I was to rewrite the Constitution, well, first of all, I wouldn't rewrite the Constitution. I'd just go back to the Articles of Confederation because those were pretty darn good. But what would you think about? So ask yourself, what's the purpose of a Supreme Court? So I think the original idea was it would be the decider of disputes between the states, right? And in fact, the original 6 justices, right? It was 6 to begin with. They were regional justices. Back in 1789 or 1800, it wasn't the case that cases came to Washington D.C. to the Supreme Court. Each judge would go travel out to the region that judge covered and arbitrate the disputes locally. And at some point, it changed to now there's this big Supreme Court, beautiful building, and all the cases are tried in Washington D.C. By the whole panel. But okay, forget all that. If the purpose was to just ameliorate disputes among the states, that's one thing. But now it's also making decisions on federal law. So why not have rather than wait for the laws to get passed and then years go by and all the damage is done, and then there has to be some legal case that's brought, some lawsuit that has to make its way through all the different circuit and appellate courts, and then finally maybe it'll get up to the Supreme Court to get a decision. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense that whatever law Congress passes, it first goes to the Supreme Court for review, and if the Supreme Court says, okay, that's constitutional, then it can go to the president's desk for signing, or they could just say, nope, it's not constitutional, it just ends right there. I'm not sure that would really make much of a difference, but
I'm not
it would
a.
seem to be sure more efficient. I don't know.
You know a lot more about the history of the Supreme Court than I do. I don't think about it too much because I don't really want to reform the system. I want to abolish it.
Yeah, well, yeah, me too.
I'm an anarchist. I want nothing more and nothing less than private property and the freedom of association. But I can't think of one good reason why you wouldn't want the laws to just do a judicial review immediately. And it just sort of has to do with what the law used to be before we had legislatures and statutes. It was bottom up. And so a court wouldn't just think about the abstract nature of a particular statute, because you wouldn't have them. What you would have is them evaluating what their vision of the law was and apply it to the facts of the specific case. And I think your conception would be somewhat bad in the fact that you wouldn't have any facts of any specific case.
Right.
And I think losing that touch to reality would be a further error. We've already made a law to, up in the air, bubbles, theoretical. I think it needs to be always grounded in reality for it to be meaningful.
Exactly. I until you see something implemented, in practice and see what the real world effects of it are, you don't really know necessarily just on paper what the implications could be. So I could envision a system where it goes through a sub Supreme Court review panel or something like that. At first, say, okay, on the surface, it looks like it's constitutional and go ahead. But then you could still have lawsuits afterwards to then decide years later if it really is constitutional, or maybe it's not working the way it was intended, so therefore strike it down. I don't know.
Yeah, it wouldn't be crazy. But remember, according to the founders, all three branches are supposed to not do anything unconstitutional. Well, it's supposed to be in the back of the minds of the legislators while they legislate. And
then why have a Supreme Court?
And the president's supposed to keep that. Well, because these things don't work.
Right.
But in theory, it's not supposed to be that the Supreme Court is just a goalie, and the legislature and the president can take as many shots on goal as they want to. Who cares? No, they're supposed to uphold the Constitution. It's not just will only be one check. They're all supposed to be running a check. That's what the veto is, supposed to be.
Yeah, and two more changes I'd make to the Constitution. Again, don't interpret this as me being a pro-supporting constitutionalist, but if we're gonna have one, there's a couple other things I would like to see. One, if you are a legislator who voted for a law that got passed that was later deemed to be unconstitutional, you go to jail. Because you just passed an unconstitutional law, right? You committed treason. I don't know, maybe not treason, but now that's a fun one. That's kind of ridiculous.
It's a fun one for a movie script.
You want to talk about curbing, making legislators really think about, hey, is this constitutional? Could it ever get overturned? Then again, the Supreme Court 30 years later, 40 years later, the legislators are long gone. That'd be kind of I guess ridiculous.
All right, well, let's move on to the third one of these cases we wanted to talk about, and this is great news. I don't know if you dug into the details, Tyrone, but
no, I've been waiting for this one for.
According to the Supreme Court, it is now legal for the government to round up and shoot homeless people.
Holy shikes!
This is a case.
Man, I have been waiting for this one. Woohoo! Let's go.
All right. In all seriousness, they didn't decide that, but they
Oh,
did
thank God.
decide they
Thank
struck
God.
they struck down previous courts' rulings that a city or a county, any kind of local government, was illegal for them to uh, uh, fine or in any way make criminal um, sleeping on public property. You could maybe move people around a little bit. Maybe you could set time limits, but you always had to give them other places to go, and you could not, you know, make their crime just sleeping on public property. And doing so would have been, in prior courts' ruling, a violation of the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment and exorbitant fines and that sort of thing. And this Supreme Court struck it down, which I'm very, very happy about. As I've written about and talked about here and elsewhere, I think it's just a slap in the face to people who pay their taxes and live a normal life, for you to say there is such a thing as public property and you get to pay for it, but these other people get to treat it like their bathroom and their living room, and you can't do anything about it, and we're not going to do anything about it. I think that's very unjust, and I'm not signing on necessarily to every single law that all these different jurisdictions are gonna pass to try and handle their homeless problem. Because who knows? Some of them may be just terrible. But
Yep.
what we have been doing is encouraging this behavior, subsidizing it, and that means you get more of this behavior, and that just ain't right. So
Yep.
I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, I want to walk a thin line here, a tightrope or something like that, because I do want to have compassion for my fellow human beings that are in a bad situation.
Of course.
Um, as libertarians, we would say that these these things would be solved. Okay, nothing's ever solved. These things would be handled better through private charities and private property rights. And you might say, well, how are the two related? Well, they're completely related, because private property rights go far beyond just, say, a sidewalk. It goes to how much money you get taken out of your paycheck. Your property is being taken from you, which means there'd be more money for people to contribute to charities and things like that. We also think that a lot of this problem comes from foreign wars, where you have a lot of veterans suffering from psychological problems because of that. We have a lot of problems with homelessness due to the drug war, which creates a lot of this destruction and poverty. We think that a lot of this comes from broken families, especially in the minority communities, which we think as libertarians was maybe not a direct result, but a large contributing factor was the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson's. Actually, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It had good intentions of helping people, but actually, I think led to the destruction of the family, especially in minority communities, and minorities do make up a large percentage uh, by per capita of the homeless situations. And my theory that a corrupt money makes a corrupt people. And I think that the creation of things like the Federal Reserve and going off the gold standard and the income tax and things like this has corrupted the spirit of our culture, so all of these things are adding up to increase the homeless problem.
No, you're
Okay,
absolutely right. And as you go on, and as I think about these things, we probably should have done a completely separate episode on just this topic because it's
sure.
enormous.
Yeah.
But the picture we have in our head of the homeless person is just a struggling individual, and something happens, they lose their job, and they just can't get it together, and maybe they're being predated upon by some evil landlord or some evil employer or something, and then they just slip into, I have nowhere to live, I'm living in my car. Then the car breaks down and turns into a junker, and okay, I guess I'm on the streets now. And so in our mind, we have this picture of, things just happening to a poor person, and obviously that's true to some extent. but it's a very small extent percentage wise. Most of homelessness is a drug and mental health problem. And that's why it hurts the problem so much when you take away friction, when you make it, relatively costless for people to just say, okay, I don't want to live in, I don't want to go sleep where the church would put me up because they want me to attend services and they won't let me do drugs. And even public housing, well, they won't let me do drugs there either. So you have these people that even when they're handed lodging, prefer to not be there because what they want is, urban camping with their friends, uh, drunk and high, and nobody telling them what to do. And if you make it costless for them to take over the commons, then they'll do that. And you can't fix all of this societal ill, with laws, what the Supreme Court just weighed in on. But you shouldn't be helping promote this societal ill with laws. That's counterproductive. But I wanted to harken back to, we just did a discussion about free will versus determinism. And as I was reading what the court wrote, um, remember I paused the conversation last time because I wanted to talk about how weird it was that this broke along ideological lines. It tended to be conservatives that favored, believed in free will, and it tended to be liberals who didn't. And I postulated that they had an instinct that they don't like to punish people for things it's not their fault, you know. And then it's right here in the legal proceedings of this case. This one lawyer who was fighting on the side of the homeless here says, quote, "It's sort of the bare minimum and what a just society should expect is that you're not going to punish someone for something they have no ability to control." And then Justice Sotomayor said something super similar. Sleep is a biological necessity, not a crime. Homelessness is a reality for so many Americans, and punishing people for something they can't control, like homelessness, is cruel and unusual. And that's just fascinating because these people are not uh, NCPs. They're not automatons. They have agency. They have free will. And for these uh, these lawyers and scholars to say homelessness, that's something nobody can control. This just happens to people. I thought it, especially since we just spoken about the issue of determinism, this is exactly the way they think. They think homeless people do not have agency.
Yes, that is sort of a separate topic, and you're right. If you have that metaphysical view, that people are predestined by their genetics or their situation, and nothing's in their control, that's going to affect how you then would obviously organize your society and make laws. But I want to finish the point I was making,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
sorry.
simply no, that's okay. Which is simply this: we have a problem in our society where we spend so much time trying to treat the symptoms
Hmm.
instead of the cause of the disease. It, you said a lot of the homelessness is due to mental illness and drug addiction. Okay, and the point I was trying to make previously is um, meant a lot of mental illness. Like I said, a lot of veterans on the street, are coming back from these horrific wars, m- uh, screwed up in the head. Um, a lot of in my opinion, a lot of the drug addiction that we see today, just the terrible degree to that it's at, is because of the drug war. It's because we've made drugs illegal that it makes drug addiction worse. So to me, these are symptoms. Homelessness is a symptom of the causes. And yes, I agree that if you have a cough, you can take a throat lozenge to help your cough, but it's not going to get rid of the pneumonia that you have in your lungs that are causing it. So I get it.
You make
Homelessness is
a
terrible, and I hate it. I hate it on all levels. I hate seeing it. I hate having to live it, to walk down the street to my office fearful that I might be attacked or accosted by the many homeless I have to pass by every day. But at the same time, I am compassionate because I do really feel that a, a large majority of these people are here because of the causes that our government has created: the drug war, the foreign wars, the breakdown of the family society caused by things like welfare and the Great Society, the corruption of our money, which makes it harder and harder and harder to just make a living to get by. I mean,
you make a great point, and it would be really, really interesting to actually walk through every government program and track how on the margin each one contributes to homelessness. Like how much is caused by occupational licensure on the margin?
yeah, I mean,
You talk about that
sure,
person, that hypothetical person who loses their job and can't find another one. Well, if we didn't have all these barriers to entry, a lot of
absolutely.
people could just start, offering goods and services to people.
Right.
And as long as there's free association on both sides, who the hell are we or a legislature or a cop to get in between and say, no, you're not allowed to do that? It's cruel and it makes people hopeless. And as you said, when you're counterfeiting the money supply and starting wars and being crooked, and the morals of our society and morals of our society are in massive decay because of government action, which is immoral. So how can we be surprised that some people are destitute or
That's
just
right.
prefer to waste their lives getting drugged out camping outside?
Yeah,
Because why try?
exactly.
Why be virtuous in an unvirtuous
Exactly.
society? That makes perfect sense to me. To
It,
just shrug your shoulders and say, whatever, guy. I'll
yeah.
collect bottles and cans, sleep at, Southern California is pretty nice. I could just
Yeah.
camp out here in the bushes or whatever, and I'll get by, and I'm high. My life's great. Why should I try when the Fed's going to inflate my money away, or
That's right.
say what I'm doing is illegal in some regulatory fiefdom?
And I also think that in a way, the government doesn't necessarily want to solve the homelessness problem because I actually think this is a way they're sort of sweeping inflation under the rug.
Mm,
I, 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 I think I look, the statistics are, look, probably you go back to ancient Egypt, there were homeless people, right? I'm sure there were. I'm sure
sure.
through all of human society, there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that are going to choose voluntarily just to live on the street, to not participate in the economy in a traditional way. And those people, there's really nothing you're going to do about it. I do feel like there's a percentage of the human population that is just messed up. Nothing you're gonna do about it. But there's no explanation for the explosion in homelessness to just
No.
say that's the cause. The people, there's always been homeless people, and now they're just choosing to be homeless for no reason other than that's just what they want to do. I can't buy that. It has exploded in the last decade,
Well, check
almost
out
out of
this.
nowhere.
Check out this perverse incentive. There have to be in big cities government departments that are tasked with dealing with the homeless problem, right? There has to be, a couple of dozen people in New York City for whom that's their job, right? Well, what incentive do they have to fix homelessness? Where does what happens to their budget if they were actually to solve the problem and there weren't any homeless
Right.
anymore? So you've created this. You haven't just created. You're funding with tax dollars a bureaucracy who the last thing they would want is for homelessness to get solved.
Yeah, look, the government does not care about you.
No.
Period. They never have. Please, if you're out there thinking the government's just there to help you and they're just doing the best they can, it's a lie. Look, in the Great Depression, unemployment rates were about 25%, right? It was pretty bad. And a lot of people will say that World War II got us out of the depression. Now, you and I know that's bullshit, and we can direct some people to some books on why that wasn't the case. But there's actually one piece of that is correct. When people say World War II got us out of the Great Depression and a booming economy, World War II had the effect of ending unemployment.
That's right. by
by
conscription and death.
by murdering
That's correct.
millions of
If you
young
have a
men.
problem of homeless men just littering your society, there's one way you can get rid of that. Kidnap them, throw a gun at them, and ship them overseas to fight or die.
That's right. So homelessness, in a way, is a version of that. It's a way the government can inflate the money, spend, 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 and sort of hide the inflation. It's insidious, and I really think as the money supply, as inflation gets worse and worse, and the dollar becomes less and less valuable, it makes it harder and harder and harder for people on the margin to make it, and that is going to have the effect of pushing people into homelessness. And once they are out of the economy, quote unquote, things look a lot better. Employment stays low. Inflation stays lower because you don't have as many people consuming in the legitimate economy. It's now all in the black market. So it's a way for them to get away with the astronomical deficit spending that they're doing, and they don't care. As long as they can keep spending, they will, they will, they will. They're never going to fix the budget. They're never going to fix the deficit. They're just going to keep going until it just all implodes and breaks down. That's it. I mean, so back to this. So I am torn on this decision. Yes, it's the right decision. I don't I don't like seeing all the homeless people where I live for my own personal safety and my own personal quality of life, and it's terrible for the city. But I also feel like it's inhumane. My God, here in Minnesota where I live, it gets freaking cold in the winters. I don't know if anybody's aware of this. And I walk by, homeless people on the street, the sidewalk, in the sleeping in the middle of the night. How is this humane treatment? It's like, can we get them off the streets? Maybe. And I don't know where to put them, but the street isn't the place for them. So let's do something. And if this court decision allows for cities to now take some more proactive measures, I think it's a good thing for all parties, for the homeless and for the citizen that is paying for like you said, the public spaces.
Yeah, I think this
It's not
court's
it's not a
ruling.
solution. It's
I
not a
think this
solution. It
court's
doesn't
ruling is
solve the
not.
disease, but
I think this court's ruling isn't nationwide. It covers just the Ninth Circuit,
just the Ninth Circuit.
which
Yes.
is a bunch of Western states. And
Yep.
as I wrote, I think one of the great things about this is just to finally get a little experimentation in all these different
Yes.
cities.
Yes.
I don't
100%.
think, we don't know what the answer is necessarily, but compassionate people who are now caring not only about the homeless, but about the citizens too, will work on this. And maybe part of the working is just getting out of the way of private actors exercising their compassion in building homes.
I hope so.
Because I know there are regulations in a lot of these places where that's illegal. You can't
Yes.
feed them without a permit from the government. You can't house them without a permit
Right.
from the government. So if you want to
Right.
make things better, get the hell out of the way, which is
Yes.
hard for a fiefdom to do for reasons we already discussed. Well, I think we've let this episode metastasize a little bit, but it's a good
Sure.
one. So yeah, some interesting Supreme Court decisions.
Again, 2024 is going to be, I mean, get a year's supply of popcorn, because man, there's a lot of stuff going on. So sit back and relax, grab a drink, eat your popcorn, because every time you turn on the TV, it seems like something else is happening. It's the greatest show on earth.
And I didn't get a chance to say this at the time because time travel hasn't been invented. But I just want the world to know that when we did our predicting what's going to happen in the second half of 2024, and I made the outlandish prediction that maybe neither Trump nor Biden or one of the two wasn't going to be on your ballot in November. I said that before the debate.
Right.
Just so y'all know.
All
All right. Well, thank you, Tyrone, and thank you everybody for listening and watching. Go to Haman Nature substack.com for all the other things we do, and we'll catch you next time.
I guess, oh gosh, the one that's sticking in my head is Missouri, but that's the free speech one. We'll get to that in a second. I don't know what the actual case title was for the
Well,
immunity one.
these things happen on podcasts.
What
Let's look it up.
wasn't it a Georgia one? Something Georgia?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the one that that's the one that it impacted the first. Maybe we'll do a little editing.
Or not. I mean, people will just see the bumbling idiots that we are.
Yeah, it turns out
And
we
that's
are
cool.
kind of dumb.
We have opinions and shit. About stuff we don't know. Way to do some research.